Hello everyone, and up next here on our Let's Play of the Homeworld series is the historical and technical briefing. So, as I mentioned in my introduction video, I'm actually going to go through and read all of this. Well, technically not all of it, because it also functions as the game manual, but the basic history and the history of the clans as well. And my reason for doing this is because, again, putting myself back into the late 90s, early 2000s, this was, in my opinion, one of the very first serious examples that I saw of a game developer packaging a significant document that goes into the world building and general lore, as it were, of the game itself. And what we'll find is that there's an immense amount of information that has already been planned out regarding the history and the technology and the overall background of the game, which is not necessarily elucidated on within the game itself, because the way the game tells its story is almost mythical, like an oral history in effect. So this document, the historical and technical briefing, gives you much more detailed background information. While not necessarily essential for enjoying or understanding the game, just goes, the extra mile towards understanding more of the context of the universe that the game exists within, so to speak. Like I said, we're not going to be reading the entire thing, but I will be reading the main historical briefing. So, let's get started. A question of origins. The debate over our past on this world reaches back through the entire documented history of civilization, a period covering over 1,300 years. The harsh conditions across this world, Karak, fueled the myths of other places and times where we did not have to spend so much of our strength on simple survival. While the issue of our distant past was primarily a religious matter, it wasn't until the dawning of the time of reason that advances in biological and chemical sciences revealed a disturbing lack of commonality between our biochemical makeup and that of most Karakid life. Ironically, it was the birth of the Diamid movement, with its many scientific breakthroughs, that created a philosophical environment where the oldest myths and the newest theories could be wedded into what we now have accepted as the xenogenesis theory. Except for a small variety of bacteria and a single species of small forager, our helix proteins are completely different from all other forms on Karak. We are left with no other choice but to seriously consider the theory that we are aliens to this world. Of course, this answer only leads to more questions. I'll be also reading the blue text as well. So A1, Karakid environment. Karak is an old planet, 6.7 billion years, that is nearing the end of its geological activity. Most major terrain features have been weathered down and vast deserts cover most of the world except for the polar regions. These are shielded from the encroaching sands by the three northern seas and the Great Magirian Ocean in the south. Temperatures along the equator can approach the boiling point of water, and the only life forms larger than microbes survive by burrowing deep under the sands and along subsurface water channels, or by hibernating during the hottest months. The polar regions are almost optimal for our people, but the limited arable land and scarce resources have prevented our population from growing beyond 300 million. Figure 1.1 down there is the desert planet Karak seen from space. A2, Heresy Wars, circa 520. Early history of Karak is marked by conflicts between various clans based on terrestrial considerations and religious dogma. This came to a head in 520 when the two largest clans in the north, the Sidim and Galcian, went to war over the issue of what had caused the gods to place us on such a world. The Sidim believed we were once a great race living in paradise, but had been punished by the gods for our hubris and cast down to this world. The Galcian believed this idea to be heretical arrogance in light of their belief that we had been created to suffer from the beginning, and Karak was all that we could hope for. The conflict eventually spread to the southern zone as well. Even more obscure points of theology provided the rationalization for a series of wars, large and small. That lasted almost 300 years and created clan feuds that would not be put to rest until the discovery of the Guidestone. A3, Tor, circa 810. The Heresy Wars left our people on the brink of extinction, with precious resources and infrastructure destroyed during the 3 centuries of religious conflict. In 810, with all factions exhausted and falling from internal anarchy, a small clan from the settlement of Tyr emerged from hiding. This obscure northern clan was the first to develop chemical explosives and was thus unmatched in clan warfare. It also preached a worldview based on science and logic, and offered protection to anyone who wished to live in such a world. A few decisive battles showed that none of the theological clans could hope to defeat the Nabel, and within 20 years, Tyr was the new capital and the time of reason had begun. A4, Mission Suleiman Riots, circa 1024. Space exploration was not greeted favorably by the entire population. Large factions from some of the poorer clans believed technology and industrial output was being wasted on this effort. They thought it would be put to better use trying to alter Karak or at least discover ways to support more people and hold back the encroaching deserts. As final preparations for the first orbital flight were being made, an obscure theologian named Purdoin provided the unifying force for these factions by resurrecting the old myth that tragedy would befall our people should we offend the gods with another act of arrogance. This religious revival spread throughout both polar territories, and it culminated with an attempt by a frenzied mob to tear down the Suleiman launch vehicle on the eve of its liftoff. This disaster was averted only by the wisdom of the high technocrats, who stood on the launch base defense turrets, preventing them from firing on the crowd, and preached reason to the crowd for the entire 14 hours required for launch. Purdoin slipped through the cordon and prayed for salvation beneath the rocket's main engines until they ignited, vaporizing him. He died a martyr for the cause. Figure 2.1, up in the upper right corner. Peering through the heart of our own spiral galaxy, the dark horizontal band is a vast bank of interstellar dust that obscures the more distant bright core region approximately 35,000 light-years away. The xenogenesis question and early spaceflight missions. It was becoming more obvious that we, as a species, were relatively new to Karak. However, this theory alone did not bring peace to our world. The mechanism used and reason for our arrival was still being hotly debated and was even cause for theological revival on the eve of our first orbital flights. The age of orbital exploration revealed the first clues that we were not indigenous to Karak. Once we had progressed to piloted flights, reports of unusual pieces of metallic debris in high orbit soon led to dedicated retrieval missions with surprising results. While nothing larger than a handspan could be found, samples were brought down from orbit and soft-landed in the high desert. Initial analysis made it obvious these were pieces of advanced manufactured and machined structures. Detailed atomic analysis revealed trace elements and isotope combinations unknown on Karak, or, as it was eventually discovered, anywhere else in the stellar system. This was yet another piece to the puzzle of our origins, but it did not truly confirm anything except that some kind of alien device or ship had once orbited our world. Though not decisive, the discovery of this tiny debris belt spurred great leaps in metallurgy and manufacturing simply by showing that exotic, high-tensile composite materials could exist. This in turn led to advances in propulsion, first with limited fissioning of unstable heavy elements, then with more viable hydrogen fusion power plants, as effective shielding systems became lighter and smaller. The combination of these technologies spurred our fledgling space program even further, and our first steps became leaps. We were poised on the threshold of space, looking outward for answers, when a twist of fate turned our eyes back to the surface of our adopted world. The discovery of Kartoba. In 1106, a powerful radar satellite was launched in the hopes of detecting larger debris belts elsewhere in our star system. A malfunction in its maneuvering jets caused the satellite to turn toward Karak and scan the surface. Lacob Gerasi, a technician on the project, noticed a strong return where there should have been none. A quick analysis showed the powerful radar had penetrated the equatorial sand to a depth of 75 meters, and there was strong evidence of an ancient city centered around a large metallic structure. By 1110, enough science ministers had been convinced by repeated radar scans to allocate resources to an expedition into the Great Desert. Despite encountering conditions that would daunt personnel in modern envirosuits, these first brave excavators managed to uncover what came to be known as the first city, Kartoba. While this discovery was the stuff of archaeologists' dreams, even greater secrets revealed themselves when the central metallic structure was discovered to be the skeletal chassis of an advanced vessel. Though virtually nothing of the relevant substance remained except a vast array of structural beams, the real treasure lay in a shielded chamber deep below the surface. While tracing the ancient maze of power cables during the first triad of 1112, engineers opened a shielded chamber containing the remains of the ancient ship's power plant. Painstakingly transported to the modern polar capital of Tyr, this ancient device was back-engineered to provide another generation of breakthroughs in power and material sciences. But what catapulted our technology 500 years forward was the analysis of a module attached to the power plant. The device was nothing less than a solid-state hyperspace induction module. In a decade of analysis, we were ready to take our first steps into the galaxy, but it was not until 1135 that it was revealed just how far we had to go. The discovery of the power plant and hyperspace module was considered the gem of ancient Kartoba, and with them safely in research labs in the temperate poles, the old city was left in the hands of a few dedicated archaeologists. They struggled to do their work under some of the harshest conditions on Karak. Led by a young woman named Mavath Sagald, they gave our entire civilization an answer and a goal as she pieced together the location of the mythical observatory temple of Kartoba. Accidents left her to excavate the site nearly single-handedly, but when she opened the inner chamber, she recognized immediately the full import of what she found etched on a single piece of black stone. A5. Kartoba Analysis. Kartoba appears to be the first city built by our ancestors after surviving planetfall on Karak. Analysis of the ancient infrastructure seems to indicate this ancient vessel suffered irreparable damage and was unable to move its crew to a more temperate polar climate. Thus, the city spreads radially around the wreck, and much of it is underground where we believe our ancestors went seeking relief from the high desert temperatures and regular sandstorms. Many of the structures closest to the hull are made up of patched sections of hull plate. As the city grew outward, more rudimentary structures were carved from the local sandstone by hand. The massive fusion core had been moved from the ship to the underground chamber where it was found in order to feed power to the original city, which probably fell soon after the ship's power plant failed for the last time. The Guide Stone. Archaeologist Segald had found something that was as unremarkable to the casual eye as it was monumental to the future of our people. When she studied the stone further, she discovered that it had once been an ornately carved artifact that was nearly destroyed by immense heat. Whatever message it originally was intended to convey had long since been erased. Some distant ancestor had cast it through time as a message for generations to come. Etched into the upper surface is a simple diagram of our galaxy, and a single gouged line leading from a point on the rim to one deep in the galactic center. Adjacent to a spot easily identifiable with Karak's actual position is a single string of numbers that give a three-dimensional vector, and at the other end of the line is a single word, ancient but common to all clan dialects. Higara, home. Figure 1.3, the Guide Stone. Found in the ruins of Kartoba, it has been dated to more than 3,000 years old. Precise galactic features and the indisputable coordinates of Karak were etched into its dark surface. In a small area near the region representing the galactic core, a single ancient word is clearly visible, home. The effect this simple artifact, now known as the Guide Stone, had on our culture was unprecedented. Our materials scientists confirm the age of the artifact at approximately 3,000 years, and are confident they can match the Guide Stone to its system of origin should we come across it. After a long history of struggle, strife, and interclan warfare, the confirmation that Karak was never our true home has inspired an era of cooperation like none ever known. For the past 250 years, there have been no significant conflicts or bloodshed. We have dedicated our entire industrial and scientific resources toward a single common goal, returning to Higara, our home. Global plebiscite of 1155. Had archaeologist Segald brought the Guide Stone back to her own clan stronghold, Karak might have once again descended into partisan struggle over possession of the artifact, and who would be the first to exploit its secrets. Instead, she realized what she had found was far more important than loyalties to family or clan. It was a startled gathering of high ministers that found their debate disrupted by a sand-covered young woman carrying an ancient stone. By nightfall of the following day, some of the greatest minds in the Diomid had examined the Guide Stone and confirmed not only its validity, but also its implications. With this knowledge in hand, the high ministers returned to their clans to bring the word that we were not indigenous to this planet. From the most powerful cross-territorial and industrial clans to the smallest agricultural villages, the decision was unanimous. The entire industrial and scientific might of all Karak would be put to the task of following the path laid by the Guide Stone. For the first time since we came to this world, we were one clan, the Mothership. In the first triad of 1159, a final plan was accepted for the vessel that would follow the path indicated by the Guide Stone. What had delayed the project for so long was simply that no one, neither astronomers nor religious leaders, could say for certain what had brought us to Karak, so none could say what an expedition would encounter. It was finally decided to build a vessel capable of doing everything, including establishing a new colony deep coreward. Known simply as the Mothership, this vessel would be part carrier, part survey ship, part factory complex, and most importantly, the temporary home for millions of people frozen in cryogenic sleep. It would have to be able to deal with the great unknown reaches of the galaxy, and whatever discoveries or threats they might contain. It would be the greatest construction project in our history. Ministers from every clan abandoned their cloistered competitive policies and pulled every resource to develop stratagems and designs, and then allocated them to the various industrial hubs throughout the polar zones. In the meantime, clans that had been trailing the cutting edge in technology and production turned all their efforts toward agricultural work, feeding those who were occupied by the construction effort. Figure 1.4, an early mothership design. The mothership will serve as the base of all operations for the transgalactic voyage. Construction challenges. The planned mothership was so massive it took years to simply build up the infrastructure required for the construction project. Asteroids from the debris belt were pulled into a parking orbit around Karak. There, manned cutter ships used high-energy lasers to break the planetoids into manageable sections that could be towed into the Great Maw of the Phased Disassembler Array. The PDA used a series of fusion torches to reduce the planetoid chunks into their component elements. Robotic materials plants then combined those elements into whatever alloys and composites were required for the grand task at hand. Many of the lessons learned there were refined and implemented into the next generation of resource-gathering ships that would serve the mothership herself. The next step was to construct the orbiting scaffold where the mothership would be built. This framework took 10 years to complete and is the single largest structure ever built. New disciplines in macro-engineering had to be created and put into practice just to complete this construction yard. The scaffold measures 25.6 kilometers long and is stationed in middle orbit around our world. Easily visible from the planet's surface, it is the only moon Karak has ever known and has been a natural fixture in the night sky for almost 4 generations. Only the eldest of our people can remember a time when the skies were dark and there was no glittering lattice work to remind our people of their destiny. During the next 25 years, the mothership slowly took form inside the scaffold, building up in layers from the center sections outward, until the final layer of ceramic armor was laid just last year. For the last 8 decades, more than 10,000 technicians, along with another 25,000 robots, have worked on this ship continuously. Many of the fusion torches and materials plants that broke down and processed the planetoids early in the construction program were cannibalized and incorporated into the mothership itself. During the course of this massive project, 2,357 personnel gave their lives for the future of our people, and their names are engraved on the central hyperdrive core of the mothership. They will never be forgotten, and their brave spirits will precede this vessel into the gulf of hyperspace. Figure 1.5. 4 generations have witnessed the scaffold silently orbit the moonless Karak. In this view, supply and service vehicles can be seen adjacent to the main assembly, mothership sections, and systems. In such a huge vessel dedicated to so many tasks, it is necessary to devote entire areas toward fulfilling each part of the ship's mandate. Fleet Foundry. The mothership is designed to be a mobile construction yard on par with the original orbital facilities that created the mega vessel. The automated manufacturing bay is capable of high-speed production of vessels from tiny scouts to larger ships that are yet to be designed. Various parallel production bays allow for dozens of larger components to be cast and assembled at the same time, thus radically reducing the time needed to build larger vessels. Ship components are based on many of the modular technologies being used across various hull designs, which saves time and allows for faster simultaneous construction. The Foundry Fuller is capable of using multiple construction tracks to simultaneously build a fleet of scouts, assemble a squadron of corvettes, and create enough ordnance for both sets of new ships. A large hangar provides docking sleeves for a huge array of vessels to be serviced, and the same sleeves can be used as berths should the mothership need to enter hyperspace with a large fleet of auxiliary ships. None of this will be possible without the immense quantity of raw materials brought in by the resource collector vessels. Built around the model of the original cutting ships, which were used to break down raw materials for the initial construction of the scaffold and the mothership, the resource collectors are designed to reduce and acquire a variety of space material, ranging from solid planetoids to gas nebulae. The collectors then return to the mothership and transfer the contents of their holds for processing through a phased disassembler array. While this PDA is smaller and quite a bit more efficient than the orbital array used to supply the scaffold, it works on the identical principle of array fusion torches. It will reduce any material to its componential elements, allowing a magneto-hydrodynamic shunt field to sort the vaporized elements according to atomic weight and carry them to the storage shells. The massive honeycomb of storage shells, almost 3 cubic kilometers of storage space, lies just under the surface of 65% of the mothership's hull. This allows for quick access and venting in the event of a jam or a storage cell rupture, and provides a final layer of armor. Figure 1.6. Inside the mothership's main construction hangar, it is the single largest enclosed volume ever built and will support shipbuilding on every scale possible. In this view, the vast main hangar is visible, looming beneath the factory slab in the assembly area. Strike-craft docking sleeves are housed within these huge subdecks. Service vehicles populate all sections of the hangar in great numbers. Highly versatile, they perform countless vital operations from simple maintenance tasks to complex assembly. Navigation. The mothership has 2 modes of travel. The first is based on conventional fusion drive technology and consists of a series of large fusion reactors designed to vent high-energy plasma through an opening in a shaped magnetic bottle. Maneuvering jets are fed plasma from the main exhaust through a series of conduits, and this allows a portion of the main thrust to be diverted to maneuvering. The mothership's secondary drive is less understood, but this is the system that makes this voyage possible. Toward the lower aft portion of the ship lies the large shielded area containing the hyperspace module. This is a direct copy of the one found under the sands of Kartoba, but expanded 12-fold to accommodate a vessel of the mothership's mass. Even though the effect has been tested extensively through ships fitted with test modules of various sizes, our control and understanding of the effect is somewhat limited. This has resulted in a need for massive energy to induce the wavefront, prohibiting its use on any vessel too small to carry at least 3 industrial fusion plants. Hyperspace physics. The solid-state hyperspace module is a quantum oscillation device capable of generating a waveform throughout any surrounding structure. It does this in order to induce an effect known as quantum tunneling. Because the device was reverse engineered, the exact workings of the module are still very uncertain. All our scientists know about the effects of hyperspace transport has been derived from limited empirical data. Theoretical data is almost totally non-existent. The risks involved in employing a technology we know so little about on such a vital mission could not be avoided. The raw materials needed to build the hyperspace module are extremely rare on Karak. Only a few prototype drives were built prior to the mothership module because of this material shortage. Figure 1.8. The hyperspace module under construction in orbit. Although the core of the device is entirely solid state, the power and control systems embodied within it are the most complex of devices ever built. Only the upper part of the hemisphere can still be seen bulging above the surrounding construction. There is another drawback to our limited understanding of hyperspace. We can only induce a linear tunnel effect of massive proportions with relatively crude control of distance. The module is projected to have a range of 2,500 light-years for a single waveform event, and in order to trigger the drive, we must charge the module with all the energy required for such a stunning distance. Should we wish to travel a more appropriate and cautious distance, we must crudely halt the wave effect by discharging the module's energy and dropping back into normal space-time. Further hyperdrive limitations. Another problem with our current understanding of hyperspace is that we can only take limited gravimetric readings of the normal space through which we are tunneling. This means we can detect a mass that disagrees with our navigational data, but should we wish to know anything about the anomaly, we must interrupt the hyperspace module. Gravity wells also have a destabilizing effect on hyperspace travel. Test ship losses have taught us that a hyperdrive must be shut down far outside any star system's gravitational curve. The hyperdrive module is programmed for 3 priority interrupts. The achieved target interrupt is based on our own astronavigation technology, which takes a sighting in normal space and discharges the module once the time versus distance hyperspace algorithms state we are roughly near our programmed coordinates. The anomaly interrupt occurs when a gravimetric anomaly is detected by the ship's sensors and the vessel is automatically returned to normal space to either gather resources or, in the case the disturbance is actually another vessel, investigate further. Finally, the safety interrupt occurs when the ship's control computers sense any irregularities in either the waveform effect or the mothership's hull integrity. All 3 interrupts empower the navigation computer to automatically drop the ship into normal space. Fleet Command. As the project neared completion, the full size and complexity of the mothership became clear. System coherency specialists encountered a problem that seemed to defy solution. In even the most basic function simulations, there was so much data to be analyzed and so many responses per second required, the projected bridge crew grew into the hundreds. As new command staff were added to the simulation, the hierarchy became completely unmanageable. It became apparent that in any sort of crisis, the mothership would quickly suffer from communications paralysis. Computational experts tried, but no simulated intellect system they devised could be trusted completely, and the whole project was at the verge of collapse when a young neuronics expert stepped forward with a desperate plan. At the time, Karen Sajet was working on experimental biological circuits that would mimic brain functions. When she heard that an information bottleneck was facing the systems of the mothership, she realized her research could be put to another purpose. Neuroscientist Sajet suggested using an existing brain, her own, to bridge the gap between living nerve branches and the mothership's data shunt. Karen Sajet's solution. The drawback was that her research was still decades away from even a basic neuronic interface, and the only way to patch someone into the data system of the mothership was to lay a nerve trunk open and attach the shunt directly with a biocircuit interface. In order to serve as a living command core to the mothership, one of our people would have to volunteer to be surgically altered so that most of the nerve trunks serving limbs and senses would be patched into ship systems instead. The subject would then have to be embedded permanently in the bridge of the ship. Karen Sajet refused to allow her technology to be used on anyone else. She is now the mind of the mothership and the voice of Fleet Command. As Fleet Command, she is capable of handling hundreds of alerts and updates per second while analyzing what tasks can be handled automatically and which situations need to be brought to the attention of the crew. Should the ship come under fire, she will instantly analyze systems across the entire length of the ship and monitor all response activities. Fleet Command observes the status of all vessels and updates their positions. Research reports are also processed through her central core, along with information on construction projects. Fleet Intelligence. It is the job of Fleet Intelligence to analyze incoming data from probes, observation equipment, and sensors. Centered just below the main bridge is a large spherical chamber containing work comm stations, with data shunts centered around a full holographic projection pit. When the mothership is underway, this pit will be manned permanently by shift teams composed of the best scientists, diplomats, linguists, and tactical officers, all specially selected for their knowledge and adaptability. Fleet Intelligence has access to not only the mothership's sensor arrays, but to the fleet archives as well. Whatever the mothership should encounter in deep space, Fleet Intelligence will interpret the data and give an accurate analysis as the situation permits, offering tentative conclusions and tactical recommendations. Fleet Command is essentially a kind of a wetware PC, right? Directly hooking a human up to the computer, as it were. Fleet Intelligence is what we would call in modern-day navies a Combat Information Center, or CIC, or maybe even CDC, Combat Directions Center. Cryogenics. The first major stumbling block for the plans to start a new colony was life support. The resources needed to keep 600,000 people alive for years in deep space are simply impossible to store and transport. The mothership would have to be so huge no number of fusion plants could move it. To solve the problems of long spaceflight, our life scientists turned to cryogenic suspension. With the technology tested and perfected, engineers began filling the cryonic hold with the 600,000 cryonic pods that would be required for the voyage. Cryonic studies. Biotech studied numerous desert-dwelling animals that go into a form of suspended animation deep under the sands during the hottest times of high summer. The biological mechanism that cracid life forms use to deplete their cells of water to avoid vaporization expansion during the high temperature exposure was recreated artificially in order to solve a similar but opposite problem, the destruction of cells due to ice expansion during cryogenic freeze. Early experiments with adapted cryogenic technology were successful, and in 1185, Ray Magan was placed into a cryogenic pod and placed aboard a small probe vessel set to circumnavigate the Karak system in a cross-elliptic path. This journey took 6 months to complete, and it was planned that pilot Magan would not be awakened nor consume life support elements during the entire voyage. The test was successful, and the only side effect was a book of poetry pilot Magan wrote afterward to describe the long, vivid dream that he experienced while in cryogenic fugue. Volunteers have chosen to surrender as much as 12 years of their lives before the voyage even starts in order to be processed for cold sleep. First, they are prepared and placed in their cryonic pods, where they are slow frozen over a period of 2 weeks. The pods are then stored in holding areas deep under the surface of Karak until 100 are ready to be placed on a rack module and boosted into space together aboard the heavy lifter units. These rack modules are then loaded into large cryo trays. A single tray provides power and stable containment for 1,000 rack modules, 100,000 individuals in all. Figure 1.7. Inside the cryogenics hold, the pods are widely spaced apart in the buffer solution. Due to the narrow temperature tolerances of the cryopod systems, a large bath of buffer fluid is necessary to maintain even temperature in the hold. In the event of a total power failure in the hold and spontaneous malfunctions of all auxiliary fusion pylons, this system will still support its frozen occupants for 6 months if the insulated walls of the hold are not breached. Alright, well, let's hope they work. I mean, I've seen the movie Passengers. We don't want Chris Pratt or Jennifer Lawrence waking up a little too early for this voyage. You know what I mean? Might be problematic. The 6 cargo trays will be loaded into the mothership once the hyperspace drives have been successfully tested. Until then, they will wait in a stable orbit near the scaffold. The vast hull aboard the mothership containing our people is in the most protected and armored area of the vessel. The cryonic vault stretches for 3 kilometers and is nearly 1 kilometer in length. All that is required for life support is a constant supply of power to the freezing units. A deviation of even a single degree can be fatal to the occupants if it occurs outside the intricate revivification procedure. In light of this, even though the 600,000 pods draw their power from the main reactor core, some auxiliary fusion pylons are set into the vault walls, each one capable of handling the power demands of the vault by itself. Boarding and cryogenic placement have occurred on schedule for the past decade. Auxiliary vessel technologies. Due to the unprecedented concentration of research and development required for the construction of the mothership, our strike craft technologies and capabilities are in relative infancy. Compensation for the shortcoming will be made at every opportunity, with more volatile experiments taking place aboard auxiliary research ships, which will be constructed during the course of the voyage. Our present capabilities in auxiliary ship systems are detailed here, as well as some projected systems which our scientists are nearing breakthrough as the mothership prepares for launch. Presently, the largest auxiliary vessel we are capable of constructing is the resource collector, with combat vessels restricted to a single-seat scout. Figure 1.9, an early scout prototype during trials over the desert proving grounds. Maneuvering. All small vessels are based on the same ducted fusion torch drive that moves the mothership through normal space, but on a much smaller scale. Fighter and corvette drives are so small they must carry onboard reactive mass to be passed through the fusion torch and ejected as relativistic plasma. This limits their range greatly. Larger self-sustaining power plants will enable the construction of new capital class, provided the necessary chassis and drive research is successfully completed. Vector altering maneuvers are achieved by ducting small amounts of main drive plasma through various ports scattered across the hull of smaller ships. Since the mass directly affects the inertia of ships in space, small fighters are capable of extreme maneuvers from the ducting of small amounts of plasma. These craft are capable of intricate attack and defense maneuvers. It is likely that with increases in ship size, agility will drop considerably, and the proposed capital ship class will probably be restricted to slower movement. Weaponry. We have no idea if there are any military dangers lurking between us and the galactic core, but the mothership is carrying our most advanced weapons technology to cope with any possible threats. Our space weapons technology is based on two principles of directing catastrophic levels of energy at a target. First and best known is the kinetic weapon. Projectile guns have been an art in and of themselves for nearly 1,000 years now. In space, the principles remain the same, but the implications are far deadlier. The lack of atmospheric friction allows for high-speed projectiles to be fired by magnetic acceleration. Space-based cannons use cylinders of heavy elements covered in a superconductive shell and fired from a fairly simple magnetic accelerator known as a mass driver. Speeds of almost 10,000 meters per second are possible, and there are plans for larger ships' guns that can fire much larger projectiles. Currently, fighters carry small rapid-fire mass drivers in a multiple rotating barrel configuration. So, for all intents and purposes, I believe these are actually rail guns, essentially. It's too bad the US Navy kind of gave the axe on that weapons program, but whatever. Another weapon discipline based in our exploration of space is based on the focused direction of high-energy particles. Ion beam weapons, as they have come to be known, are based on the principle of firing streams of positive ions from a particle accelerator. These weapons are capable of delivering incredible levels of energy to a small area. Unfortunately, the prohibitive energy cost of creating large beams at long range means that our available power plant technologies are inadequate for fielding these systems. In fact, beam weapons may be so massive that entire ships have to be built around them. The ranges and velocities of space combat have made missile technology completely inadequate for the task of delivering explosive payloads. While there are no foreseeable plans for missile-based weaponry, a recent projection analysis has revealed the possibility of a quantum leap in missile speed and intelligence that would make them viable weapons again. Figure 1.11. Early mass drives were cumbersome, inefficient, and unreliable. Designers continued to refine superballistics until compact and powerful weapons were available for the mothership and its accompanying vessels. Armor and defensive systems. Survival in space through the preservation of pressurized crew areas is the highest priority of ship designers. Whether considering theoretical enemy action or disastrous encounters with natural phenomena, ship hulls are designed to survive with multiple layers of redundancy to compensate for a variety of effects. Presently, combat vessels are equipped with an initial ablative layer designed to vaporize instantly at the point of contact with either kinetic or beam weapons. The high-speed cloud of vapor serves to either deflect the rest of an armor-piercing round or cause interference with a particle beam and dissipate its power. Beneath this ablative layer is a thin, power-absorbing layer. Finally, the last layer protecting the ship is a thick crystal polymer composite interwoven with advanced ceramics. This armor is the strongest material we have yet developed, but it is capable of flexing under extreme impacts. Cockpits are double layered with this kinetic armor. Figure 1.10. Frigate-class ships will be heavily armored. The darker composite subskin can be seen beneath the ceramic surface armor. Short of the fantasy of an all-powerful energy shield, this combined kinetic beam defense gives our ships the greatest chance of surviving damage while maintaining a manageable mass-to-thrust ratio. Mission priorities. The mission facing the crew of the mothership is profound. It is nothing less than the quest for the origins of an entire people. Our mission is now irrevocable. It has become clear during the past 120 years of driven industrial and technological expansion that Kirak can no longer sustain us. While always harsh and unforgiving, our technological development has stripped the planet of what few vital resources it contained, and the narrow bands of temperate climate at the poles are slowly shrinking. In order to survive as a people, we must leave Kirak. The guidestone in relation to galactic structures. While the Guidestone map is crude, it does allow us to make certain assumptions and correlate them with our knowledge of galactic cartography. Galactic coordinates. Kerak is situated on the outer edge of our spiral galaxy along a secondary arm populated mainly by stars in the early to middle stages of the main sequence. While our galaxy's core is obscured by dark interstellar dust clouds, our position allows for a clear study of neighboring galaxies. From these studies, we can infer the structure of our own. From what we can observe, our galaxy is a standard spiral type A with a pair of stellar arms radiating out in a curved fashion from a central hub. This galactic core is the home of an ultramassive black hole. The Guidestone seems to indicate that the homeworld lies in the resource-rich intergalactic sphere, where the star systems are older and closer together. If there are other species of sentient starfaring life out in the greater galactic neighborhood, our odds of encountering them will climb as we approach the central hub. This should be taken into strategic account. Guidestone origins. The map gives a crude indication that we seek a star system on the edge of the galactic hub. But the inner sphere is so massive and dense that we must look to the makeup of the stone itself for clues now to narrow our search to realistic proportions. Figure 1.12. Kerak's position in the outer spiral arm of the galaxy can be seen encircled at left in this celestial navigation chart. The horizontal line indicates the projected heading of the mothership as it moves toward the galactic core. The black stone bears the unmistakable characteristics of vacuum formation. Most theorists think this indicates it may be an artifact of a moon instead of a planet. Analysis of its atomic structure suggests it is a rock formed by slow accumulation of layers. Some of these layers are composed of high-energy isotopes, which could only have been created by the bombardment of extremely high-energy photons. These are produced only in the most violent of galactic phenomena. In observing other galaxies, we have noted periodic flarings of high-energy particles generated when the central galactic black hole swallows a particularly massive star. If we apply this knowledge to our own galaxy, we can calculate the rough distance of the homeworld system from the galactic core based on isotope density per layer in the Guidestone. This calculation, combined with the map itself and the vector provided, should narrow the search to less than 350 star systems once we arrive in the general area indicated. Oh, only 350? Well, at least it's not 350 million. Yeah, that really narrows it down. Yeah. Command priorities. The command staff will be responsible for the priority functions of the mothership and her auxiliaries. Local commanders will handle the execution of said orders, and command will assign formation, destination, and targeting priority to a squadron. Individual pilots will determine the attack and evasion maneuvers independently. Strike craft will notify command of fuel-critical situations, but will not refuel at their own discretion unless ordered. Given the possibility of encountering spacefaring races, the mothership will carry a diplomatic cadre, prepared to deploy automatically in any peaceful first contact situation. They will report their findings and opinions to fleet intelligence, who will in turn make the recommendation. Command staff may have to make the choice between war and peace. Command will also be required to order the construction of new auxiliary vessels and monitor resource levels aboard the mothership, assigning resource collectors to priority targets if necessary. The automated systems in the fleet foundry will attempt to devote equal amounts of resources to whatever production assignments are queued up, but will halt construction across the board should resources be depleted. Command may cancel projects in order to concentrate resources or wait for resupply, since the foundry automatically restarts when raw materials are made available. Although scientists will be in control of their own departments and research vessels, it is Command that will designate overall research goals for each team, as well as an overall research strategy. Command will also be able to link multiple research teams together in order to concentrate resources on a single goal, theoretically reducing the time required to make a breakthrough and integrate the technology into our infrastructure. Decades of effort and the entire economic and industrial output of our planet have been dedicated to this mission. Mounting this fleet has stripped our planet of essential materials and drained our energy reserves. Those of us who remain behind will suffer many hardships, but as long as our people have a fighting chance of returning home, our sacrifices will not have been in vain. Good luck. Alright, so now that we've gone through the majority of the historical and technical briefing, let's take a look at some of the clan histories. The Kerakid social system. Society on Kerak is organized among loose family associations, many of which include hundreds of thousands of members. An extended family grouping is called a kith, or plural, kithid, and most archaeologists agree it is a social artifact that dates back before our arrival on Kerak itself. Interpretation of ancient legends and translations of texts found in the ruins of Kartoba suggest that our ancestors' journey to this world was arduous enough to break down all social structures except the most basic family bonds. When the power plant at Kartoba failed, refugees, in all probability, fled in small groups of friends and relatives. Harsh conditions and the passage of hundreds of years hardened what was originally a practical system, taking care of your own loved ones first, into a ritualized system of alliances and loyalties we come to know as the kith system. A kith has a loose hierarchy based on one's social position within the family. Originally, this was based primarily on seniority, but as technology has changed the face of life on Karak, the kithid too have changed, and now family ranking is based more on wealth or personal influence than age. Organization within the kith is recursive in nature and models that of a core family unit. Where a single family has a primary leader, a secondary, and then a group of dependents, the next level of kith organization is based on the same system. There is a primary family who makes the policy decisions, a secondary family which hears disputes and makes recommendations, and a number of families of lesser power that have sworn allegiance to the primary. The primary family within a kith is called the kith sa. This structure is not static by any means, and while it is not a trivial matter, families are free to change their primary allegiances as they see fit. A family's position within the kith rises and falls with how many swear allegiance to them. Although it is much rarer, from time to time, a family will move from one kith to another or even feel the need to become their own full kith. In ancient times, a kith sa could direct all within the kith to war, demand families dedicate time and finances to special projects, or even move the kith to another region. In modern times, the kith sa is a political and financial leader, only in that it acts on the wishes of the entire kith as established by referendums. The kith sa from all over Karak meet in the Grand Diamid, located in the capital Tyr, to debate global policy and resolve legal conflicts between kiths. Traditionally, kithid concentrate their power in one or two disciplines and gather families under their banner by being the best place to find advancement in a particular field. For example, Kith Sajet have been associated with the scientists on Karak for over 1,000 years, and is known to have the most advanced computer labs in the world. Bonded couples interested in the field often apply to a Sajet family associated with such labs. Alliances between kith are also based on mutual interests, and they often lead to closer ties or complete reorganizations. During the last century, when the manufacturing families of Kith Hral realized that the future was in orbital systems, they first tried to influence Sahral to begin investing in aerospace technologies. When this gambit failed, the entire manufacturing branch of Kith Hral broke away and joined with a relatively small kith that specialized in space technologies. The new Lirhra has gone on to take the lead in the design and construction of the mothership. In the modern era, the kithid have slowly transferred their power to the individual, but it should be noted that it is still a powerful means of social identity. Karakid society pursues a single goal today, and our new sense of racial destiny has reminded us that we are all families of one grand kith. Unfortunately, for the unity of our people, tradition dies hard, and it takes little stress for any Karaki to think of family first and Karak second. Kith Galsian. Of all the kithid, none has lost more throughout the centuries than Kith Galsian. The Galsian line is ancient, and some of the oldest documents on Karad bear their sigil. While there is some debate about their specific origin in the collapse of Kartoba, it is clear that by the time civilization once again rose on Karak, the Galsiani were already a spiritual and political force to be reckoned with. Historically, while minor cults have come and gone, the majority of Karaki have always believed in the great maker Sejuk, whose hand shapes what is. The majority of religious sects differ not over whether Sejuk exists, but in what his nature may be, and his reasons for bringing us to Karak. The majority view until the time of reason was some variation on the theme of punishment, the logic being that no god would leave his people on such an inhospitable world if they had not done something to earn this fate. Many vital survival tactics, such as conservation of resources and not risking the future of the kith on untried methods, were reinforced by dogma in ancient Karak. Undesirable acts were always described in terms of punishable arrogance. These beliefs helped keep our people alive during the Great Trek from the central deserts, but once in the temperature polar regions, the same beliefs held back useful innovations that the more hospitable environment made possible. Generally, how wrathful one fully believed Sejuk to be tended to dictate how wary one was of cultural and technological advances. Of the three major religious kithid, Galsian, Feral, and Samta, it was Galsian that preached the strongest message of punishment. The dogma of righteous suffering and humility held that Sejuk had cast our people down to Karak for some celestial paradise to pay for our arrogance. Galsian theologians preached that to deviate from the most accepted and ritualized survival methods was to actually extend the period of time before our people would be lifted back up to heaven. In the early days, this strict dogma paid off and allowed Kith Galsian to survive and prosper during various ecological disasters during the period between 75 and 250. Once this turbulent time passed and people penetrated further into the temperate polar region, More innovative Kithid regained their power and Gulsian power began to fade somewhat. Many archaeologists believe that Kith Gulsian deliberately started the Heresy Wars as an attempt to bring all the lesser Kithid back under its power during the resulting chaos. Fortunately for the technically inclined among us, it was Kith Nabal which emerged victorious from the Heresy Wars, and the dogma of penance and repression began to fade from the hearts and minds of Karaki. Despite this, the Gulsian power shattered forever after nearly 300 years of war, became even more extreme in their religious beliefs, as if to compensate for the rest of the sinful planet. By the time of Reason was at its height in 710, the Gulsian were down to less than 30 vassal families, and only the great desert temple city of Saju Ka remained under its power. Perhaps it was the sense that history had passed them by, or simply a desire to commit an act of sacrifice strong enough to regain the favor of Sajuk himself. But in the year 717, the Kith Sa of the Gulsian performed an act that has lived in infamy ever since. At the time, Saju Ka was the artistic gem of Karak. In its great temples and halls were most of the great works commissioned in the name of the god Sajuk, and in its libraries were the collected works of our people gathered before his eyes so that he could see them and judge us worthy. Though Sajuk Ka had been built in the first hospitable valley found in the north, time had allowed the deserts to crawl ever northward themselves, and by the 700s, sand would have completely swallowed Sajuk Ka if not for the complex series of wind baffles, dikes, and sand paths designed by the great engineer Gar Nabal. One night during the height of the spring winds, Sajuk Ka was lost to our people. In a single act of divine madness, Mirpat Gulsian Sa ordered his people to blow up the entire system that held back the sand. The light from hundreds of explosions was still visible when the hungry sands began pouring down in the streets of Saju Ka. Within 2 days, the city was completely buried and thousands died in the mass evacuation. The whole of Kith Gulsian were convicted in absentia by the Diamid in Tyr and deemed an outlaw Kith. This punishment had very little effect on the Gulsian as they slipped away into the wastes during the terrible night, abandoning the progress they saw as a decadence that would eventually bring down the wrath of God. Since then, Kith Gulsian has wandered the great central deserts, surviving by the skills and rituals they held so dear. Occasionally, they will make themselves known by raiding scientific communities or stations in the wastes and leaving massive theological documents proclaiming how close we are to the end. Military expeditions to track them down once and for all have always failed, and a certain mythology has grown up around them, as if there is a nagging suspicion in the minds of modern Karaki that the only way Kith Gulsian could have survived is if they really did have the grace of Sajuk. Some say that they have even found his lost city under the sands, and Saju Ka once again echoes with mumbled prayers and offerings made in the darkness. Certain acts of sabotage during the construction of the mothership seem to be Gulsian-inspired, and it's likely that even today there are families secretly aligned with the ancient religious Kith. And indeed, we will find out a little bit more about the details of the Gulsian and several other Kiths when we go back and replay the prequel to this game, Deserts of Karak, because the Gulsian play a significant component in that game. Kith Paktu. Prior to the year 462, Kith Paktu was a minor farming Kith, living on the slopes above the Salt Sea. On the year their most famous leader, Majir Paktu, was born, the long rift between the religious leaders of Kith Sid and Kith Gulsi, which were then the most powerful Kithid in the north, finally became an unbridgeable divide. In 462, the famous Sidim Council announced a new dogma. The traditional Sidim cosmology, which once held that all Kithid on Karak were exiled from a heavenly paradise, was abandoned. The truth, according to the proclamation of 462, was that only the Sidim were of divine origin. All other Kiths were native to Karak and therefore inferior, their blood tainted by corrupting sand. In accordance with the new dogma, many cruel pogroms were passed against non-Sidim Kiths, the people known as Gritidim, or Sand People. By far the harshest of these measures was the Clean Water Act, which forbade non-Sidim Kithid from living at the headwaters of a river or stream, lest they foul the water which Sidim downstream would have to drink. Hundreds of families were displaced by Sidim temple men, turned out of their ancestral homes and made to march downstream, carrying as much of their former lives with them as they could. In 488, Kith Paktu joined the ranks of the dispossessed. At the same time, the temple of the neighboring Kith Gulsi had become obsessed with sins of pride and by the redemption of Karak through suffering. The Sidim made obvious targets for the sermons of Gulsi holy men. For every Sidim sin of pride, they said, a more brutal and excruciating expiation was demanded by the gods of Karak. Lesser Kiths to the north, already suffering under the weight of Sidim oppression, often were willing to join their holdings to the Gulsi rather than see them taken by the Sidim. Many welcomed Gulsian soldiers and temple men into their holdfasts, only to find themselves at sword point and made to watch as their sinful books and belongings were burned to appease the gods. Heavy tributes of both food and fodder were demanded by Gaulian armies, and appalling sacrifices were sometimes demanded by Gaulian priests, those who saw no reason why the pure of heart should suffer alone. Clashes between Sidim and Gaulian holdings intensified over time, and even a remote Kithid were forced to choose sides. Both great Kithid were too powerful for any smaller Kithid to challenge on their own. Caught between the proverbial rock and a hard place, the Grididim were finally ready to try the unthinkable, crossing the Great Banded Desert to the south, looking for new land. And indeed, this tension between the Gaulian and the Sidim will play out as well in Deserts of Kerak. By this time, Majir Paktu had become head of the Paktu Kithsa. Although the first migration may not have been entirely his idea, it's certain that the fate of all the people of the Kith Paktu was in his hands. It is difficult for us to imagine today what he must have felt as his people built the first great sailors at the edge of the desert. Although many Karaki believe there might be arable land at the southern pole, no one had ever attempted to cross the Great Banded and return to tell the tale. The only confirmation of land south of the desert came from mad Manani travelers rambling about endless seas and grasses that touched the sky. The migration offered slim hope at best, so slim that no Karakian dared to risk it until there was no other hope at all. The rest, as they say, is history. Nearly 50 Kithids set out from the plain of Albegido in 490 and sailed into the Great Banded Desert, sweeping over the burning sands on the winds of the seasonal storm, the Chak Mahat. By the time the men, women, and children of the first migration reached the shore of the Hunan Mountains, only 17 families were left, and all of them had lost weaker members on the journey. Still, more died as they struggled over the Hunan. Without anyone to guide them to the easiest path, they lost many to poisonous water, rockfalls, thirst, and lizard bite. As the story goes, many of the firsters fell into despair among the burning red canyons of the Hunan and did not want to go on. Despite whether he had been the leader from the beginning of the migration, Majir Paktu was definitely the leader on that day. He stood at the head of the column and pleaded with the people to continue. "I can smell the sea," he said. "It's only a little further." The people did not believe him, and more than a few turned to start the hard trek back to their sand sailors, still docked at the desert shore. But as legend has it, at that moment a bird appeared in the cloudless sky above them, a sea spirit circling against the hot sun. The Kithid and the first migration followed the sea spirit and Majir Paktu through the mountains, and when they stood on the last red hilltop, they were looking down at the rolling breakers of a great gray sea. Straight away, that expanse of water was named the Magirian Sea, after the man who brought them there. The people of the first migration settled on the shores of the Magirian, and were presumed dead by many in the north for the almost 2 years it took to build up their homes and holdings. In the spring of the third year, however, Majir Paktu and a group of picked volunteers attempted another crossing of the Great Banded Desert to take back word of the new land to the north, where so many still lived in a nightmare of war and oppression. Majir Paktu did not survive the return, but 7 of his followers did. These 7 Paktu Kithsmen passed through the Northlands on foot, taking word of the new land with them everywhere they went. Once that word spread, there was no stopping it. Dozens of families built sand sailors on the famous plain of the Albegido every year, trying to escape the heresy wars and the madness of their Sidim and Galsi masters. Alas, Sidim and Galsi were not quite finished with the people who escaped their tyranny. Although they ignored the migrations for many years, both Sidim and Galsi lost many hectares of holdings to the war. By 650, it occurred to both of the great northern Kithid that many of those who fled to the south were still considered their vassal clans, and by treaty still owed them lands and tribute. There were at least 3 major attempts to assault the southern lands from 652 to 700. The last of these was the most successful. The army of Liam Galsi actually arrived at the pass of the Hunan Mountains almost intact in the spring of 698, ready to subdue the unholy Kithid of the Southlands and their Kithsa. On that day, Kim Paktu, the grandson of Majir Paktu and leader of the Paktu Kithsa, arrayed an army of 30,000 swords on the shore of Magirian. Every one of them wore the colors of Kith Paktu, and every standard bearer carried its flag. "These are my people," Kim Paktu said, "and this land is ours. You have no vassals here." Badly outnumbered and facing a fresh and well-supplied army, Liam Galsi nonetheless led his troops into battle. Very few of the Galsi who followed him that day escaped with their lives. Although they killed hundreds of Paktu, the southern Kithsa eventually prevailed, and no such crusade was ever attempted again. To this day, the Paktu are still the Kithsa of all southern Kithid, even those that are not closely related to them by blood. The flag of the Paktu is white, the color of the sand sails which carried its people across the banded desert, emblazoned with a sun stained red by the blood of those who died in search of, or in defense of, freedom. Silhouetted against that sun is the shape of the sea spirit, an eternal symbol of hope and faith. Paktu believe fiercely in independence and despises priests and dictators. Its people are optimistic, innovative, and venturesome. When things are darkest, someone will always repeat the Kith's motto, "I can smell the sea." The Kith Soban, the Kith of spirit. In Kraken society, the majority of citizens are secure in their Kith ties, within the immediate family and within the larger circle of more distant blood relationships, not to mention our professional associations and alliances. Most of us are bound at many levels. If we should ever have a falling out with one Kith Saw, we belong to many other Kithid by marriage, and inclination could change our alliances at any time. This was not always the case. Prior to the emergence of the Southern Federation and the Nabel intervention, very few Karakians had ties outside their own Kith, and if they did, they were ties of dominance and submission. One Kith was made vassal to another and owed tribute to its masters, in return for which it was given the protection of the larger Kith's army, and the benefit of trade with the larger Kith's holdings. In all of this, however, there was no provision made for those who were without Kith. Unthinkable as this state may seem to us today, it can still bring a shudder to the modern Karakian to consider the fate of a Kithless man or woman during those times. Banishment from the Kith was effectively a death sentence at any time prior to the year 416, when Kith Soban was born. The origins of Kith Soban, the Grey Brotherhood, are somewhat hazy. It appears that two vassal Kithid, which held lands along the Second Sea, were invaded by the temple men of a strong neighboring Kith. The vassals fought back furiously, defending their homes with desperate strength, and succeeded in killing a few of the raiding Kith. In revenge, the invaders punished the survivors brutally, although they had already surrendered. Many of the basic taboos of Karakian society were violated. All the children of the farmers were murdered, as well as the leader, man or woman, of every family. Those that remained were driven from their holdings and fled across the sparkling desert to carry the news of these atrocities to their Kith Saw. The leader of this group was Soban, later known as Soban the Red. When he knelt before his Saw, he recounted the horrors that the neighboring Kith had committed against his people and demanded vengeance. He offered to personally lead the army that would ravage the invaders and teach them the error of their ways, and waited for the men and women of his Kith Saw to join them in a rush across the sparkling desert. Unfortunately, this support was never to come. Soban's Kith Saw, afraid of possible repercussion, or perhaps simply realizing the Kith was not strong enough to prevail against the larger and stronger Kith, refused to attack the Reavers. Instead, members of the smaller Kith became vassals to the larger, joining their blood to the blood of the murderers. When he heard of this, Soban tore the colors of his Kith from his body in shame. His followers did the same, and in doing so they abandoned their Kith completely, an unheard of gesture at the time, especially coming as it did from landless men and women. According to legend, Soban then declared the word Kith was meaningless when any Kith Saw could turn a deaf ear to the blood of children crying from the ground. He vowed that he would never belong to any false Kith again. The only Kith which deserved the word was the Kith of Spirit, the brotherhood of like mind and shared ambitions. All the followers of Soban took a new color, a deep and vivid red, the color of blood flowing from the heart. Although there could not have been many, their first act as a Kith was a successful attack on the holdings which had once been their homes. When they left their old farms behind, not a blade of grass was left green, nor one stone standing on top of another. Everything was razed, and every invader killed in ways that gave Kith Soban a bloody reputation for years to come. Kith Soban became a martial Kith from then on, and as years passed, a peculiar set of rituals developed among them. Although many other warrior Kithid existed at the time, those Kithid were standard in their aims and organization. They were martial to the extent that they desired the property and possessions of the weaker neighbors. Only the Soban were completely landless and existed purely as mercenaries. The Sobani mercenary is a curious feature of Karakian history. For centuries, Sobani took part in every military conflict on the planet, and their skills as soldiers and commanders were highly prized. When the services of any given Soban were bought, he or she would dress in the colors of the new Kith and fight in the service of that Kith, regardless of personal risk or cost. When the term of service was over, down to the hour and minute, Soban mercenaries would put down their arms, remove their adopted colors, and return to their own Kith. If the end came during the middle of a battle or 1,000 miles from home, they would still go. Contracts for their services could not be renewed on the scene, and only through their Kith Saw. To this day, the Sobani are completely devoid of standard family groupings. No marriage, as such, is permitted among their ranks. And although male and female Sobani are permitted to form whatever alliances they may want, there is no such thing as a Sobani child. Children born to the Soban are left as foundlings with other Kiths, or their parents are made to leave Kith Soban to raise them. Despite the fact that there has not been a major war on Karak for 200 years, the skills of Kith Soban are still valuable, and they never lack for money and influence. Sobani are often preferred when influential Kithid, like the Nabel, need intelligence officers or security officers, and virtually all modern-day admirals and generals are trained at Soban-run military academies, which are now open to the public. One can pay for the training and discipline that was once available only to lifelong Sobani. A current true Sobanism still exists in our society and always will as long as men and women continue to reject the status quo. Some Karaki still join Kith Soban of their own free will, renouncing all other Kith ties and associations. Others are forced to join when driven from other Kiths for violating their taboos. Before taking the red, as it is called, a prospective Sobani must repeat the ritual which Soban performed centuries ago. All other Kith colors must be forcibly ripped from the body, a powerful gesture of negation. To some, it represents the ultimate rebellion. To some, the only salvation. But Kith Soban imposes the same discipline and solidarity on them all, for which Karakian society may well thank them. Kith Sajet. Kith Sajet is something of an oddity among the power structures of the Kithid. While they are an ancient and respected Kith whose expertise has been courted by Kith Saw across Karak, they have never parlayed this influence into any real political power. Kith Sajet is, in fact, one of the only Kith to have validated claim to direct Kith descent from the ancient first city of Kartoba. Translations of the words and calculations found on the wall of the temple observatory where the guidestone was found made several mentions of a group of astronomical philosophers with the family name of Sajet. Even the Sajet sigil, a series of embedded circles representing the celestial spheres, can be found etched in the temple doors. It is now an accepted fact that Kith Sajet once was responsible for the preservation of the guidestone and constructed the temple observatory to protect it and scan the heavens. And therein lies the true power of Kith Sajet, its undying desire to question, preserve, predict, and record. In ancient times, they were the first to plot the path of the planets in the Karakid system and derive a calendar from them. They were the first to discover the 13-year progressive cycle of sandstorms that tear around the equator of this world and predict where the rains follow the end of every cycle would fall. Most of the impartial histories of the heresy wars and the resulting reformation were penned by Sajet scribes, who recorded it along with their observations of topsoil destruction and the slow crawl of the sands northward. During the periods of upheaval, Kith Sajet have always been too valuable as allies and advisors to be turned into vassals. Any Kith who killed or attempted to interrogate a Sajet was shunned by the science philosophers for a period no shorter than 100 years. In order to keep their knowledge from being corrupted, any Kith who wished to become Sajet swore an oath directly to the Sajet Saw, and had to serve faithfully for 2 generations before being instructed in the sacred wisdoms. The closest thing to a scandal that has ever shaken the Sajet Kith occurred during the Time of Reason, when it came to light that during the Heresy Wars, certain Sajet vassals had actually lived under a secret secondary oath to Kith Nabal. These secret Nabali used their positions of Sajet immunity to move through the various warring factions and carry out missions of retrieval and intelligence gathering. When this truth was revealed, the sense of outrage was strong, but Fleer Sajet Saw realized the extremity of the situation may have justified the betrayal. Even though she was able to bring enough of her Kith over to this line of reasoning to avoid sanctions or exile for the families involved, there is still a lingering thread of mistrust between some Sajeti and Kith Nabal to this very day, and the debate over the use of science's power is still a passionate one. As the Time of Reason progressed, Kith Sajet expanded their studies and moved away from the tradition of celestial mechanics and mathematics. Various families began to delve into the nature and origin of life on Karak. Within a century, Krill Sajet presented a paper to the Diamid in Tyr presenting the scientific evidence that we bore little biological similarity to the vast majority of Karakid life. This scientific proof of the religious tenet of exile shook Karakid society, but established once and for all that Kith Sajet served the truth, however disturbing that might be. With the advent of the Mothership Project, Kith Sajet finally found a goal wherein pure science could be applied without the danger of corruption. This belief was strong enough for Sajet to overcome its distrust of Kith Nabal and join their theories to Nabali applied sciences. Sajet supercomputers have worked out the theoretical quantum waveforms of the hyperdrive module. Sajet biolabs help perfect the cryogenic process which allow us to colonize the stars. And it was a Sajet who came to the conclusion that the mothership can never function without a radical redesign of the command core. Karen Sajet, the only daughter of her Sajet Saw, and in direct line for the leadership of all Kith Sajet, was a neuroscientist in charge of the research division that was designing the command and control systems in the mothership. Many other researchers would have balked at having to tell an entire world that its dream was impossible, but Karen was true to the spirit of her Kith and broke not only the news to the Diamid, but also suggested a terrifying solution. Again, as a Sajet, she rejected fear in the face of the truth and demanded that her own system, using a living being as the command core for the mothership, be applied to herself. As our people are on the brink of a new voyage of discovery, it is only fitting that a Sajet is at the frontier, helping us satisfy our desire to know the truth and face down the terrors of the unknown, no matter what the cost. Not much is known about Kith Nabal prior to their dramatic emergence at the end of the Heresy Wars. There are a few scattered mentions of them in records of the major Kithid of the First Epoch, but the name Nabal arises only in terms of tradesmen or heretics. Kith Galcian were particularly vehement in the persecution of families under the Nabal flag, and there is some evidence that it was Galcian persecution which drove Nabal to their hidden valley refuge, blasted into the edge of Karak's tiny northern ice cap. Based on the fact that the Nabal crest, a Karaki silhouetted against a background of tiny circles and stripes, loosely resembles symbols found etched into panels on the wreck at Kartoba, some archaeologists have put forth the theory that the Nabal are actually direct descendants from some sort of engineering corps that ran the ship that brought us here. While the theory is convenient in terms of linking the unknown past with the present age of exploration, the evidence is just too circumstantial for most scholars to give it much weight. Kith Nabal itself seems uninterested in clearing up the distant past, and the hard facts only begin to appear in the years directly before the Nabal intervention, when the Kith moved to end the Heresy Wars and establish the Diamid. In those 3 centuries of chaos, Kith Nabal had almost completely cut off contact with the rest of Karak. Traders or refugees who accidentally stumbled into the valley were welcomed with open arms and given a place to make their lives anew. There is no record of any rejecting this offer, so we are not quite sure what the alternative might have been. Small parties, always made up of families with direct fealty to the Kith Saw, were sent out occasionally to bring back texts that were in danger of destruction, usually because the cities that held them were being constantly sacked. Sometimes these parties would even spirit away scholars imprisoned for heresy. It wasn't until Ifrit Nabal Saw came to head the secretive Kith that a less isolated philosophy began to take hold. Ifrit realized the wars were dangerously close to destroying the last of the infrastructure that kept the bulk of the Karaki people alive. Fields were being burned, dams demolished, and sand traps torn down simply to deprive the enemy of valuable resources. Under such an onslaught, the days of civilization on Karak were numbered. Though declared pacifists, much of the knowledge discovered and hoarded by Kith Nabal had direct military application, and so when Ifrit Nabal Saw finally proposed intervention to his people, it took only a few years for a military force to be assembled. The Nabal had been keeping the secrets of explosives, steam, and refining for more than 100 years, and when they rose, they swept out of their hidden city of Tyr, like the gleaming servants of Jakul himself. Steam-powered vehicles towed cannons to bring down the walls of despotic Kith, while handfuls of soldiers carrying repeater rifles and wearing hardened body armor moved to rout marauding armies 20 times their size. Ifrit Nabal Saw spoke at every holding, village, and city his army liberated, and offered those people all the fruits of Nabal's science and technology if they would but lay down their arms and end the pointless destruction. Unlike the major powers in the Heresy Wars, Nabal Saw did not demand renunciation of former Kith ties. All he asked for was an ending. The lesser Kithid, brutalized by nearly 300 years of war, gratefully accepted his terms, and soon the Nabal army had grown 50-fold, with Kithid whose only desire was to end the Heresy Wars any way they could. And in 3 short years, they had done it. Ifrit Nabal Saw's last act before stepping down as Saw was to establish the Diamid in Tyr as a place where all Kith, powerful and weak, could gather to resolve disputes and set policy for all of Karak. In the decades to follow, Nabal rebuilt the damaged infrastructure of Karak and improved upon it with their no longer secret construction and metallurgical techniques. Any minor Kithid were accepted into Nabal if they simply wanted to learn new crafts and trades. These same Kithid were then allowed to go their own way if they chose, and many of the major industrial Kith of the modern world began under Nabal's wing. By the time of reason, 200 years later, Kith Nabal had replaced the perilous sand sail routes to the south with rail-mounted steam cars, and had given Kith Paktu Saw of the southern polar region a permanent presence in the Diamid. Kith Nabal seemed content to fade slowly into history for many years, but the discovery of the Kartoba seemed to change all that. From that point on, Nabal formed permanent alliances with both the Sajet and Soban Kith, and began to influence first the excavation of Kartoba, and then the exploitation of technologies discovered there. Again, the Nabal Saw have been careful to spread the wealth and knowledge, but remain adamant about driving forward with the Mothership project and returning to our ancient home world. While the Mothership has near completion over the past 5 years, Kith Nabal has once again begun retreating behind the scenes, both politically and industrially. Financial analysts have noted heavy Nabal investment in off-Karak facilities, especially in the asteroid belt, and in proposed research facilities on the moons of the gas giant Harsuk. Others have noted the slightly higher ratio of Nabal Kithlings among the cold sleep volunteers waiting to be loaded onto the Mothership at the conclusion of her trials. Most analysts agree this is another sign of Kith Nabal's desire to be part of whatever future our people will find among the stars. Perhaps the strangest of all the Krakid Kithid is the Manan, or the Travelers. Although the blood bonds between the Manani are not strong, they range greatly in physical appearance and Kith traditions. They are nevertheless all considered one family, especially by outsiders who for centuries viewed the nomads as a dire threat to decency and morals, to unprotected holdings, and to the virtue of young men and women from good families. The antipathy toward the Manani is simple enough to explain. During a time when the majority of Karakians were hard-working farmers clinging to life with teeth and fingernails, the Manani maintained a traditional nomadic existence. They traveled from place to place, stopping at watering places to rest. If the water was surrounded by a hold, the Manani expected hospitality. Although they were rarely hostile toward farmers and city dwellers, they resisted any attempts to settle or civilize their kith. Driven by a hunger for new experiences and a restlessness few other Karakians could understand, the Manani could never stay in one place for long. They simply picked up stakes and moved on into the wastes again, leaving the security and the hard work of house and hold behind them. The earliest historical mention of Manani wanderers comes from the year 340, when holdings along the shore of the White Desert complained that their farms had been raided by the travelers. According to the report they sent to their Kithsah, the White Desert holders had recently closed their gates to a wandering Kith, refusing them permission to make camp by the waterside. Although the Manani went away peacefully at the time, they returned by night and came over the wall by the hundreds, overwhelming the resistance of the surprised holders. In the end, the Manani were accused of stealing nearly a ton of food and many hundred-man weights of water, which was, coincidentally, just a bit more than the tribute which was owed by the White Desert holders to their Kithsah that year. The tale of the White Desert holders was dubious for many reasons, although it was widely believed by landed Karaki at the time and for many centuries to follow. The report that Manani came over the wall of the Sandak by the hundreds is absurd, given the fact that traditional Manani never raided in groups larger than an extended family, and in such a group, there would have been a dozen able-bodied men at most. To find Manani by the hundreds, one would have had to seek them out at a gathering, their yearly meeting on the sands of Faran Shah, the dancing ground. Not only was Faran Shah nearly 200 miles from the White Desert, but focus at such a gathering would be celebration and drinking, not killing and looting. Fighting of any kind was forbidden at Faran Shah. To profane sacred ground with spilled blood was the greatest Manani taboo. Is this to say there was no basis for Kith Manan's earlier reputation as thieves? Unfortunately, no. If the majority of Manani were innocent of raiding, there were still some who undoubtedly traveled in greater strength and might have been capable of carrying off a few water barrels. The majority of travelers were probably guilty of a little judicious pilfering from time to time, even if it was only picking a pocket or picking fruit in the night. The real question is not whether the Manani were really thieves, but why, if they were widely believed to be thieves, would the majority of holdings open their gates to Manani visitors? An answer of one word will suffice: entertainment. The Manani were always traders, but prior to the Great Migration, they would never compete with the legitimate trade routes among the northern holdings, at least when it came to transporting mundane cargoes. In order to survive, a kith of travelers needed to bring their would-be hosts something that they could not get cheaper or more routinely somewhere else. In some cases, Manani would carry rare drugs or medicines that could be found only in remote places or traffic in taboo items. But since their caravans were often searched before being allowed to enter a holding, the Manani would often carry a less tangible but even more valuable freight: music, laughter, and a spectacle, a break from the hard and unending work of a desert farmer's life. For many years, Kith Manan survived by their wits and their ability to amuse hard-born Karaki. Singers and poets, magicians, dancers, actors, and conmen. There was nothing to the rumor that Manani could perform dark magic, but they could certainly make your purse and your 15-year-old daughter disappear. After the Great Migration began, life changed drastically for the Manani. Although they played no important role in the first crossing, a small kith of travelers accompanied the Paktu in the sand sailors that left Abagido in 490. Most of them returned to the north in 497, bringing their three-masted ships with them. The Manani took to the new technology in droves and made many improvements to the original design. During the beginnings of the Heresy Wars, Manani still living in the north suffered badly under the rule of Sidim and Gulsi. Their freewheeling and joyous attitude was anathema to both the Great Kith, and one of the few points of doctrine that both parties could agree on was that Manani were abominations before the eyes of Sujuk. The last celebration at Faran Shah was held in 513, during which an army of Sidim attacked the dancing ground and slaughtered the celebrants wholesale. After the massacre at Faran Shah, the majority of Kith Manani survivors took to the sail and the sword. Manani raiders, once largely a myth, became a grim and terrible reality to Sidim holdings that bordered on the desert. No one was safe from the pirate sailors, and the sight of a mast on the horizon was an occasion of panic and terror. Within 100 years, however, the Manani exhausted their appetite for bloodshed and began to use their ships for more profitable ventures. When the great mother of their kith saw, Jorah Manan, declared the war on the Sidim at an end in 656, the Manani built a new dancing ground in the Paktu held south and turned their fleet completely to trade. The questing spirit of the Manani is not dead even today. Kith Manad still controls enormous wealth, and of all the Karakid Kithid, it is the most likely to produce a diplomat or a statesman. Manani also are common in the ranks of scout pilots and are always eager to volunteer when it's time to fly an experimental craft. Being the first to see anything new and different is a hunger that still burns deep in their blood. Alright, so that was the basic history of the Kith. Now let's finish this off with excerpts from Fleet Tactical Debate 7.12.1302, featuring Fleet Admiral Paktu and Admiral Rif Sa, on the topic of fleet composition. Admiral Rif Sa. If one looks at the combat data available, the answer to the question we are discussing here today becomes obvious. Both strike and defensive fleets must be composed mainly of capital ships, with fighters serving only as escorts and deep harassment forces. Only capital ships have the firepower and range to do significant damage to an enemy force. Fleet Admiral Paktu. While my colleague has a valid point, I believe his tactical doctrines are based on ideal situations instead of the actual pressure situations a fleet will find itself under. We all would like to command fleets of nothing but the best and biggest, but the reality is that time and resources in combat often do not allow the creation and maintenance of a large force of capital ships. And we needn't even bother to analyze the true cost of losing a single large vessel when compared to the attrition a fighter squadron can suffer while still being maintained at combat readiness. No, as much as I find the thought of commanding multiple destroyers attractive, I have to favor the opposite fleet strategy, that of large groups of mass strike craft anchored by a handful of capital ships. Rif Sa. Oh, no you don't, sir. I have seen you undermined by generalization since we were just gnats learning to sail at sand skimmers at the training creche. I am not talking about vague plans and mythical battles. I am talking about precise deployment plans with each capital ship escorted by 6 interceptors or 3 multi-gun corvettes. Once each capital ship has its strike craft escort, they should be organized into attack divisions based on class and combined arms theory. Frigate divisions should consist of 2 or 3 ion cannon ships in a tight V formation, with an assault frigate positioned below and another in a higher slot. This creates a fighting wedge with significant firepower while creating a deadly spear of anti-fighter fire provided by the assault frigate turrets and the strike craft surround each frigate. No attacking force of strike craft could survive their first pass against such a squadron intact, while the forward firepower could punch through any opposing capital ships easily. When using super capital ship types like destroyers or cruisers, formational doctrine places these admittedly expensive and invaluable vessels in the core of any given formation, surrounded by an escort of 4 to 8 multi-gun corvettes to provide point defense fire. The key to this kind of formation is that enemy commanders are usually driven to order attacks against the heaviest enemy vessel threatening them, and this means the super heavy ship at the core of this formation serves double duty, both as the heart of the division's firepower and as a lure to bring lesser enemy craft into the deadly crossfire of the division's massed turrets. Admiral Paktu. Once again, I do not doubt the power of these fantastic collections of capital ships, but my point of cost versus benefit still stands. Are you aware of the number of interceptors one can build for the cost of a single assault frigate? Now, granted, each one packs only a tiny amount of frigate's firepower and certainly cannot survive more than 1 or 2 hits from a heavy gun. But I ask you, how much damage can 75 interceptors do in the time it takes to kill just one of these? In my tactical deployment plan, fighter wings work in mass formations and attack in waves, each with a specific purpose. The advantage of my system is flexibility and speed, a decided improvement over Admiral Rif Sa's deployment strategies, which trade these attributes for more extreme concentrations of firepower. In my fleet, an attacking group is made up of 3 distinct fighter waves. The first wave to attack is a group of 20 to 30 scouts in X formation, or to fly in evasive mode. Their job is to pull the enemy heavy fighter screen into a series of long, drawn-out dogfights and attract as much defensive fire as possible. The extremely high speed and maneuverability of the scout will result in most of the enemy turret fire missing its mark. Approximately 10 seconds later, 4 wings of interceptors consisting of 8 to 16 fighters each enter the battle and attack any obvious enemy fighter groups which are already busy hunting the scouts. Corvettes should be the other priority target for the interceptor wing. And finally, with all the enemy fleet assets tied up in tracking small, fast targets, the plasma bomber wings, in V formations, 5 to 8 ships in order to attack aggressively, should vector in on all capital ships positioned at the outer edge of the enemy fleet. Backing up this attack should be 2 support frigates guarded by 5 to 10 multi-gun corvettes. The attacking strike craft should be ordered to retreat to the support ship for repairs at the 60 to 70% damage level in order to not waste personnel. This tactic has the added bonus of luring enemy fighters toward the support group, where the point defense fire from the corvettes can cut them to pieces. The mopping up force should consist of 1 or 2 ion cannon frigates escorted by flights of heavy corvettes, and should concentrate fire on the heavies of the remaining enemy capital ships. Riftsaw. My deployment plans are idealistic. You would need the multitasking skills of a whip crawler to orchestrate that battle. Your fighter groups would be cut to pieces while you're still directing in more attackers. It is unworkable. My deployment system depends more on local commanders to make the correct targeting decisions without constant choreography from Fleet Command. Pak2. If my esteemed colleague is saying that he no longer has the skills and stamina to command such an attack, that is understandable given his years, but Riftsaw. Too old? Your kith matron. Tactical debate temporarily adjourned for consultation purposes. Yeah, it seems like the normal, usual debate, by high-ranking officers, right? Everyone's got the newest, greatest tactics and strategy to win the war, right? Well, we'll see. All right, so following this is basically the rest of the manual and the gameplay guide and various other things. There is some other information on there regarding things like technology and the ships themselves and stuff like that. I may go into that a little bit later if I decide to, for whatever reason. But honestly, this has been going on for quite a long time now, and my voice is getting really tired. And you know what? Let's just get down to the gameplay. So that is the historical and technical briefing, at least the parts that are informative for you. Hopefully that build up more of the world building, gave you more context for the fact that ultimately this takes place in another galaxy, far, far away. Anything else regarding the overall story, I will try to explicate on as we play through it. So, thank you.